Imagine a force so powerful it can buy your favorite coffee shop, control your healthcare, and even own the house you live in. Right now, private equity firms control over $9 trillion in assets worldwide. Yeah, trillion, which is more than the entire GDP of Germany, the fourth largest economy on the planet. But they aren't just sitting on piles of cash. You see, they're actively buying up businesses in almost every single industry. And the scariest part, you probably have no idea that they're behind it. And by the end of this video, you'll realize that private equity isn't just another investment strategy. It is a parasite that is sucking the life out of everything that you care about. Let's break it down. Private equity is basically a group of rich people that's using other people's money to buy up companies, gut them for profit, and flip them. It's kind of like house flipping, but for entire industries. The problem is they don't care about the businesses they buy or the people working there. Their goal is to squeeze every last drop of profit out of the company before leaving them on life support. They're in, they're out, and you're left dealing with the wreckage. So let's talk about something personal. Your favorite local coffee shop. You think it's a cozy spot, maybe a little bit pricey, but it's worth it for the vibe, right? Well, private equity firms see it differently. They swoop in, they buy it, and the first thing that they do, they jack up prices. That $5 latte, well, now it's $7, but it gets even worse. The premium local coffee beans, they're gone, replaced by bulk crap that costs less and tastes like it too. The friendly staff who knew your name, well, they're either laid off or replaced by cheaper, less experienced workers who don't care about the job. And the worst part, the name and branding stay the same, so you never realize that this place has been taken over by the corporate machine. But don't just take my word for it. This is happening everywhere. Private equity now controls more than 10,000 companies across the US. And according to a report from the National Bureau of Economic Research, employment at those companies drops by nearly 13% after they're bought out. So not only are they raising the prices and cutting quality, they're also laying people off left and right. And the people who do stay, well, wages tend to stagnate, benefits dissipate, and work environment, well, it gets a lot worse for them. Now let's take this to another more serious level. Healthcare. Imagine waiting weeks for a doctor's appointment and then being rushed through in 5 minutes. Now that's happened to me. It's probably happened to you. Well, why? A lot of times because private equity firms have turned your local clinic into a money-making factory. Since 2010, they've dumped over $1 trillion into buying hospitals, urgent care centers, and doctors' practices. The result, they cut costs by firing staff, they push shorter appointment times, and even limit treatments, all so that they can hit profit margins. And this isn't just bad service. This is dangerous. A study in the American Journal of Managed Care showed that when private equity takes over healthcare providers, patient outcomes get significantly worse. We're talking 20% more complications after surgeries and longer hospital stays. They're literally putting profits over patients. But it gets even darker too. Ever wonder why it's so hard to buy a house these days? Well, it's because private equity firms are buying up entire neighborhoods. Firms like Blackstone have bought more than 80,000 US homes across the nation, and it's turning them into rental empires. So while you're trying to scrape together a down payment, they swoop in with all cash offers that no normal person can compete with, and then they jack up rent prices because they know people have no choice but to pay. In fact, rents in these properties owned by private equity firms are raising 20% faster than non-private equity owned properties. You're literally being priced out of your own neighborhood. So here's how they do it. Private equity firms use something called leveraged buyout. They borrow insane amounts of money to buy a company. But here's the trick. They don't actually pay off the debt. The company that they just bought, they get saddled with it. So imagine the scenario where you buy a car, but instead of actually making payments, you force the car to pay for itself by scrapping off its parts. That's exactly what these firms do. And when the company starts to fail because of all the debt, well, they walk away with all the profits, leaving the business to collapse and the workers to fend for themselves. And this might sound a little bit confusing, so I want to break it down with the downfall of Toys R Us because it happened with them. So in 2005, some private equity firms wanted to buy Toys R Us for about $6.6 billion. But instead of using all of their own money, they borrowed most of it, about $5 billion from banks. So they only used a little of their own money to actually buy the company. Now, after they bought the Toys R Us, they didn't pay back the loans themselves. Instead, they pushed it onto Toys R Us, making them pay back the $5 billion loan. So now Toys R Us has a huge debt to deal with, even though they didn't take out the loan in the first place. Because Toys R Us had to spend most of the money paying off the massive debt, it couldn't invest in the stores, compete with other companies like Amazon, or upgrade anything. It was like they were stuck in quicksand, struggling to stay afloat because all of their money was going towards paying back the loan, not improving the business. So ultimately, Toys R Us couldn't handle the debt and they went bankrupt in 2017. The private equity firms had already made money from fees and other ways during the years they owned it, but Toys R Us is left with a massive debt and thousands of employees end up losing their job. Private equity isn't just hurting big companies, it's choking out small businesses too. When a private equity firm buys a popular gym chain, they end up cutting costs. Temporarily, they lower membership fees and they flood the market with their locations. Meanwhile, independent chains, well, they can't compete with these artificially low prices. So the local gym chain, the one that offered personalized classes and they know your name, well, it gets pushed out. Before long, the only gyms left are those owned by private equity firms, where service goes down, fees go up, and the once vibrant, community-focused fitness scene becomes just another cookie-cutter corporate franchise. It's so frustrating, all because private equity had to crush the competition. Now, here's the scariest part of this all. Private equity operates under the radar. You think that there's competition between companies, but in reality, they're all owned by the same few financial giants. It's an invisible monopoly. Just look at fast food chains. Ever notice how the menus at all these different places start to feel the same? It's because private equity firms are behind so many of them. It's the same for retail, housing, healthcare, and even media. These firms are quietly turning industries into monopolies that benefit them, and they crush everybody else. Private equity isn't just bad for consumers, it's bad for the economy as a whole. Research shows that private equity-backed companies are 50% more likely to file for bankruptcy, more than any other non-private equity counterparts. Why is this? Because of the massive debt that they're loaded with. When these companies collapse, the workers lose their jobs, the suppliers lose contracts, and the local economy takes a hit. All the while, private equity walks away with all of the money. So you might be asking, what can we do about it? First, we need to shine light on it. Private equity firms rely on the fact that most people have no idea that they even exist. They operate in the shadows, but the more we talk about it, the more pressure we put on lawmakers to actually regulate them. We need policies that protect workers, small businesses, and consumers from being exploited by these corporate vultures. And so here's the bottom line. Private equity is a predator, and right now it's winning. It's gobbling up businesses, jacking up prices, laying off workers, and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. But we don't have to just sit back and watch it happen. The first step is awareness. The more we know, the harder it is for them to hide in plain sight.